Welcome. I'm Megan Dugan-Bassett, Senior Policy Associate at Women Employed, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Christina Warden. Welcome to our first webinar on emerging models in developmental coursework. Before we dive into the meeting agenda, I will ask Chris to review some webinar housekeeping items with you.
Good afternoon. We just want you to know that during the presentation today, your phone lines will be muted. We have a full agenda, so we'll have to ask that you hold questions until after the presentations. However, the chat window in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen will be open throughout, so you can type questions into the chat window anytime during the presentation. You can continue to use the chat feature, but there's also a feature that will allow you to raise your hand if you have a question that you'd rather ask in person than type in. You will have an opportunity today to share your thoughts through polling questions. And at the end of the webinar, a survey will pop up on your screen, and we ask you to take 2 minutes to provide us with feedback that we'll use to plan future webinars. As you heard when you entered, this webinar is being recorded, and we will send you a link to that recording so that you can access it after the webinar, in addition to having access to the slides. And you'll notice in your chat window on the bottom left-hand corner, there's a number, but if you need technical assistance, if you're having difficulty with either audio or the web portion of the webinar, you can call our web service provider, ReadyTalk, at 1-800-843-9166.
Thank you, Chris. If you've been tuned into what's happening in America's community colleges over the last few years, doubtless you've heard a lot of back and forth about developmental education. It's kind of developed into a fight in some areas. Developmental education, which is a more comprehensive student-centered form of what's commonly called remedial education, has been an issue of contention in higher education circles and even in state houses as legislators have jumped into the fray. In some states, legislators have gone as far as legislating how long students can be in developmental education or who can decide whether or not students need developmental education. In Illinois, some campuses report that nearly 90% of their students require remedial or developmental coursework. Statewide, the number engaged in this coursework is actually much lower, but still needs quite a bit of improvement. Around 5 in 10 first-time students enroll in developmental coursework in Illinois, but only around 14% are graduating within 3 years. That may be due to the fact that some students who test very low and have very low skills may need to take 4 to 6 levels of developmental education or coursework before they start some of their college coursework. With more jobs requiring some form of post-secondary credentials, this is a huge challenge for our colleges that really needs to be addressed if we are to make sure good-paying jobs are accessible to low-income families. With such a large number of students needing developmental education, moving the student success needle in this area often requires a cohesive approach. And today, our presenters are actually going to be talking with us more about how they've done that on their campuses, how they've gotten everyone on their campuses engaged in this effort. You may be wondering why an organization like Women Employed is hosting a higher education webinar, and there's a really simple reason for that. Women Employed is a nonprofit public policy advocacy group that is dedicated to improving the economic status of women, and because higher education is one of the most effective pathways to higher wages for women, we do a lot of work with community colleges and policymakers to make sure that low-income women have access to the types of quality, low-cost programs that community colleges provide, and that they also have the supports they need to complete those programs and move into higher-paying jobs. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. We will have Dr. Chris Kuberski from Rend Lake College, Dr. Lenore Radicio from Miami-Dade College, and Dr. Selina Vasquez Mireles from Texas State University and also the Center for Mathematics Readiness. Each of these speakers brings unique expertise. All of them have been involved in developmental education in some way for quite a while and have also taught. I apologize because my notes are cut off, so that's why I'm floundering a little bit here. So throughout the presentation, we're actually going to do short segments for each of these presenters, where they're just going to give you some of the basics about their institution and about what they're doing. And then at the end, we'll actually have a guided discussion, which will be much longer, where you'll get to ask all your questions of these presenters. Right before Dr. Kuberski starts, we are going to do a short poll. So just want to see if any of you are already on the list, would like to receive notice about future webinars on this topic or future Women Employed publications.
It looks like we have just about all of the poll results. You should be able to see the results on your screen. And I think we will move then back to Megan, who can keep us going with our presentation this afternoon.
And I'm just going to open up for Chris Kuberski. Chris, feel free to go ahead and get started. Chris?
Chris, it appears that we have your phone line unmuted. We can't hear you right now, but maybe if you hit *7 on your own phone.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Rend Lake College is a small rural community college in southern Illinois, and our unduplicated student headcount for 2012 was 14,470. Our full-time equivalent, or FTE, is just usually under a little under 2,500. To give you a little idea of our student population, 85% of our students are from low-income homes, and 71% are first-time generation college students. Of the students that we tested using Asset or Compass from January 2012 to December 2012, 50% of the students placed into developmental English and reading, and 61% placed into developmental math. So now that you kind of understand our demographics, you can look at the next chart, and you'll see that those placements have stayed fairly steady over the last several years. We really started watching them in 2005, and reading and writing has stayed fairly the same. Math has actually decreased a little bit since we started. At one point it was at 70% of our students needed developmental math, and now it's more like 61%. So now that you kind of understand our student population, let me explain what's occurred in our DevEd program over the last 10 years. Prior to the restructuring of developmental education in 2003, developmental education was housed in a separate unit on campus, and it hired its own instructors, it scheduled its own classes, and it had its own curriculum. What we found was there were not smooth transitions from the developmental classes into the transition classes, so the umbrella was restructured so that math became a part of the math and science department, and developmental English and reading became a part of the liberal arts department. This allowed us to schedule the same instructors for English, whether it was developmental or transfer, and we began to see a much smoother ebb and flow of instructors, ideas, student support, and curriculum. And really what initiated this was the president that we had at that time was very concerned about the success rate and the retention of the populations at risk, particularly those in developmental education, and he brought in the chairs of the liberal arts department and the math and science department and basically had a conversation about what can we do to improve this. And at the time, I was the chair of liberal arts, so I got in on this from the first discussion forward. And basically, he said, we're going to move these areas to your divisions, and you have this academic year to do research, go see other institutions and what they're doing, and figure out what would work better at Rend Lake College. We involved faculty in this research and the conversations as well, and one of the things that we initiated immediately was a college prep committee to do some research and investigate and have dialogue about what could be done to improve our programs. Some of the things that came from that year of research were in-class tutors, a course selection guide, problem-solving workbooks that were used in the math classroom. They were developed by the math instructors, and they were actually, the problems were worked in the classroom with the teacher and tutor present. And this was also when the college prep cohort tracking system for the assessment of student learning was put into place. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the college prep cohort. And in 2003, the cohort was just a pilot group, so it was a random sample of students. And then we decided in 2005 that we were going to include any student that placed into a college prep class, which are what we call our developmental classes. And they would be a part of the cohort, and they would be tracked over the course of time that they were at Rend Lake. And we actually track it for 4 years. And we began to see some interesting trends when we looked at this data. You'll see from 05 to 07 that the number of students in college prep actually increased, but then you'll see from 08 to 10 that same basic pattern. So we began to see a 3-year cycle kind of, but that we also saw the success rates, and we define success as a student who completed a developmental education class with a C or better, and then transitioned into their first transfer course, so for example, English 1101, with a C or better. The first cohorts that we tracked were having success rates around 22%, and then we began to see those success rates increase, and we were averaging closer to 32% at our high point. And so these were students that were completing a certificate or a degree at Rend Lake College within the 3-year window. And then we began to see in 09 that this positive trend was going the opposite way. And you see in 08 it's similar to 06, so we didn't really see that as a problem. But when we began to see that it was going in the opposite direction as the cohort itself, we knew that we needed to do something. And really it served as our signal that it was time to rethink the strategies that we had put into place in 08. So faculty began to re-explore alternative ways to deliver material and student supports, and we're now in what I would call phase 2 of the changes. From the trends that we've seen, we realize that the strategies we put into place originally aren't working the same way that they did, and so we're looking at some other changes. We no longer have in-class tutors. We instead have a writing and math center where students can actually drop in or email a tutor, as opposed to having to schedule a set time with the in-class tutor. We've also moved away from the problem-solving workbooks and now have incorporated math software, such as My Math Lab, for problem-solving practice when the student is with the instructor. We've also gone to an integrated English and reading course. We're piloting this semester so that those skills can be taught simultaneously, not in isolation. And also the students can complete that required course in a shorter period of time, and we also have identified some courses that can be taken simultaneously that would actually be transfer courses, so hopefully the time to completion will be shortened. But really I think what's exciting is when we saw these trends changing, it was the developmental faculty who really jumped up and said, hey, something's not going right, we need to do something. And so the cohort served as a mechanism for them to see that and also react to that. So really we see the College Prep Cohort Tracking System as an internal monitoring system for determining student success and also allowing us to respond when we're not meeting the benchmarks much more quickly than we could when we were just watching it and didn't have any data to back that up.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. We are going to move on to the second poll. Please take a few minutes just to respond, and then we'll move on to learning about what's happening at Miami-Dade College. All right. Let's move on to Dr. Lenora Radicio, who is the Vice Provost for Student Achievement at Miami-Dade College, where she oversees the college-wide redesign of academic programs and support services to improve student success and completion. And we'll move on to your slides, Dr. Radicio.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. The first thing I want to do before I jump into what we've been doing in developmental education and the massive redesign that we've undertaken is I want to go through a little bit of background of who the students are here at Miami-Dade College, because we really have a unique population compared to most institutions. We are the largest institution of higher ed. We have over 174,000 students enrolled annually in our courses. And when we're looking at the demographic of our students, we're dealing with a particularly challenging population of students. 92% of our students are ethnic minorities, 58% of them are female, 67% of them are low income, and nearly 35% of those are actually students that live below the poverty line. 69% are employed, many of them actually full-time. 56% are their first in their families to attend college. And given all of these challenges, 72% of the students who enter each year are academically underprepared. We have been seeing a downward trend in the number of students that need remediation in the basic skills areas, but it's still in the upper 60%, so we still have a particular challenge with this group of students. So one of the things that we began to look at the institution as a whole was looking at a pathway. How do we take a student who comes to us with this particular set of challenges and carry them through a pathway that leads to a certificate or a degree? And that became our institutional goal, and we began working on this approximately 2 years ago, and we're into our third year of this particular process. So the first thing that we did was to take a step back and look at our data, try to identify what the challenge was, specifically in developmental education. And what we found that there were several obstacles. Number one, it was difficult for students to complete developmental education in a timely fashion. Their subsequent performance in the college level courses was not at the same level as the students who placed directly into those courses. There was little connection between the developmental program goals and the student support and advisement that was used to help the students. And reaching any kind of college level benchmark, 15% completion, 25% completion of a degree program, was nearly unattainable for many of these students. So what we wanted to do was take a look at what was working and build on it. So one of the things that we quickly acknowledged was that our developmental education program needed fixing. It wasn't serving the needs of the students. But rather than deconstruct the entire program or get rid of it altogether, we decided to look at what works and build upon that. And we had several promising strategies that we had been looking at for several years, but had only been implemented in pilot phases at different campuses and departments. Some of these are listed here, and I'm going to go into them in a little bit more detail. So the first is modularizing the curriculum. Rather than focusing on every potential topic under the sun, is to really reconstruct the developmental education curriculum to focus only on those areas where the student has significant skill gaps. And we began our work in modular curriculum with mathematics and began to see 76% pass rates for students enrolled in those courses. We also had a lot of success with accelerated curriculum. And what we do there is we compress the material into 8-week terms with additional student support for students enrolled in those courses. They spend more time in class per week than in a traditional 16-week semester, and although the material is accelerated and taught in a shorter period of time, that additional contact time each day with the faculty member and the related support staff seem to have made a big difference with our students, and you can see that our success rates there were 75% and higher. We've also experimented extensively in our developmental reading and writing courses with contextualizing the curriculum, where a faculty member adopts the textbook of a college-level course and uses that as the primary reading material for the student. And what we saw was that students enrolled in that particular course had 100% pass rates in the developmental course and had extremely high pass rates in the subsequent course that they took in biology and math for our pilot project. We also looked at just-in-time remediation for students enrolled in statistics courses, where rather than requiring them to complete remediation before, we provided them the remediation they needed as they dealt with the college-level material. And we did this by extending the amount of time that they were in class. So instead of doing 3 hours per week in the statistics course, we added an additional 3 hours per week of a co-requisite developmental education course that allowed them to remediate. We've also been experimenting with test preparation and have had significant success in 1-week test prep boot camps that again target specific skill gaps. And then lastly, targeted student support, creating cohorts of students that have advisors and specific tutors assigned to them to help meet their needs while they're enrolled in these courses that prove to be a challenge. Now, one of the things that was a challenge was we've done all of these things and we've had great success, but they've all been at the pilot level on a particular campus, in a particular department. We decided last year that we wanted to bring it to scale at the institution. And couple that with recent legislation that was passed by our state that requires developmental education to only be offered in one of the modalities that I just explained that we have here at the college. So that precipitated more discussion among the faculty, more collaboration, because now it wasn't only something that we as an institution wanted to do, but something that was actually legislated. And so that sort of lit a fire under everyone, and as of this term, even though full implementation is not expected until fall of 2015, we do have a total of 4,158 students enrolled in those new modalities. So we will have a significant amount of data collected by the end of this term to show student success in those particular courses. And so looking ahead, in addition to the successful modalities that we've seen before and bringing them to scale, we're also looking at creating a more sustained student success experience where every student has an assigned advisor from the moment we connect with them in high school until the time that they graduate, the test preparatory boot camps, a pilot where we've taken some students who had higher scores in math and English in high school and placed them directly into college-level courses, and we have 400 students participating in that. More intentional partnerships with our local school district, as well as more holistic advisement with the students. And at the center of all of this is a very intentional and very thorough cost analysis, because we want to make sure that what we're doing is not only something that's possible under a grant-funded environment, but it's something that can be sustainable. We've been very careful in using our grant funds to only support the development and not the implementation of these new modalities and scale-up, but we also realize that we're going to have to invest in additional tutors and advisors, and we're in the midst of figuring out what the exact cost is going to be to bring that to a larger scale even than what we're doing right now at the institution.
Thank you, Dr. Radicio. We are going to do one last poll, and then we're going to move on to Dr. Mireles. So, what are the main challenges you faced in trying to make changes to developmental education on your campus? I think this will be interesting for us all to see where people fall on this. Check all that apply. Differing opinions of what strategies to use, difficulty funding changes, competing demands on time, disappointing pilot results, not enough interest or support, other, or not applicable if you don't work on a campus. The responses keep rolling in. We'll keep it open for a little bit longer. All right, we will move on to Dr. Mireles. In Texas, there have been some unique cross-institutional projects to bring a new model in developmental math to scale, and Dr. Selina Vasquez Mireles from Texas State will now share a little bit about what she's been doing at Texas State, a little bit about the focus program, and some of the changes that they are making across multiple institutions in Texas. I want to remind everybody that you can type your questions as people are talking into the chat box, and we will answer them. We're going to have about a 20-minute guided discussion at the end, so we will try to get to all those questions then. Go ahead, Dr. Mireles.
All right. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Okay, thank you. I just first wanted to thank you for this opportunity. I think it's a great initiative to have this opportunity to see things from this perspective. So I applaud you for doing this. Unlike my colleagues that preceded me, I'm going to focus, like you mentioned, more so on the mathematics perspective. Not that my colleagues at Texas State aren't doing things in reading and writing and developmental education in general. It's just that I'm a math person, so that's what I know best. I want to begin by giving you some insight on the student population. Most recently, we have had two landmark changes at Texas State. One is that we are now currently a Hispanic serving institution. And the second one is that we are now considered an emerging research institution. So there's a lot of change going on. We have more doctoral programs. But one thing that is that you may recognize in terms of Texas State is that we are rooted as a teacher college. We actually tout that a past president, LBJ, was educated here at Texas State. And consequently, we still deal with a lot of teaching type issues and have a different demographic. One of those things being developmental mathematics. If you see on, if you notice on slide 21, and I'm not sure if I click it, I guess I do. You notice on this slide here, what I'm trying to do is really just highlight our current situation in developmental math. For 2013, this fall 2013, we have over 1,100 students that are placed into developmental mathematics, and about 85% of these individuals took courses that included Algebra 2 in their high school pathway. And if we looked a little closer at the chart on the right at specific students who tended to have more help-seeking qualities, we find that 45% of those students actually took pre-calculus or calculus in high school. So there's a significant disconnect between what's happening in their preparation versus what's happening when they come to college and this meaning of college readiness. On the next slide, just to give you an overview of the kinds of changes that we've made in terms of developmental mathematics. I've been here since 1998, and one of my primary missions was to revamp the developmental math program, and I began that by just teaching the classes myself and getting to know the students and getting to know the climate at Texas State. The first thing that I did was primarily focus on pedagogical changes, recognizing that we were at the cusp of change with organizations like the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, as well as other standard-setting organizations like AMATIC, the American Math Association of Two-Year Colleges. So following their lead, I noticed that there was not any reform going on in the late 90s, early 2000s in terms of developmental mathematics, and it just seemed to be a place where everybody ended up, but and other changes were happening, but not necessarily with that population and their specific issues. One of the things that I did not focus on was not so much of the curriculum and not so much of this idea of academic support or student support. Some of the things that provided us an impetus to continue to change, although we were changing, but to address these other two issues, was the fact that we sought NAID certification, which provided us with a more research-based paradigm to reflect upon our own practices, as well as the birth of the Texas College and Career Readiness Standards. They were written by a committee that consisted of both higher ed individuals and public ed, and I happened to co-chair that committee. So I was definitely influenced by what that meant. And that preceded the Common Core state standards that are also, but very similar to it. So those were opportunities for us to then think about how we could change. And then, of course, we sought grant funding, and we made significant changes in terms of our curriculum, moving away from a pure algebraic curriculum to something that included geometry, measurement, probability, statistics, and, of course, embraced process standards that enhanced critical thinking, problem-solving, representations, and communication, for example. We also, through influences by individuals like David Conley and this idea of what it means to be college-ready, we ramped up our wraparound services and really made a difference in terms of how we can change students and their success. I think the culmination of that project, or those ideas, is best suited in this three-legged stool and best recognized through the focus model. The focus model is basically a co-requisite approach to marrying developmental mathematics with a credit-bearing course. And you can see that that credit-bearing course is the seat of the stool, and everything that we do is addresses and respects the research-based best practices, and we also use it as an opportunity to create new ideas. And one of those new ideas, and through research and through this model, has included the left hand. They should be equally spaced, but the picture makes it look like it's on the left-hand side. The learning support idea, where we actually have an opportunity to showcase real-world problems that utilize cultural relevance in situated learning to bring to life and to cement the mathematical ideas that are being taught in the developmental mathematics as well as the credit-bearing course. And then, of course, on the right-hand side of the picture, you'll see this academic support services, which is basically these wraparound services. And if you want to see a little bit more about how the program is established, there's this next slide, and you'll, I'm sure, have access to these slides, but you can see how more detail about the learning support, what the developmental math is and how that's constructed, and then, of course, the academic support and some of the research methods that are used, or some of the best practices that are used, instructional practices, to foster learning in each of those segments. So it sounds great. Is it great? And I'm happy to say that it is. And there are many outcomes that I can tell you, since we've been doing this program since 2008, there are many highlights, and there are some that we had never even predicted. Initially, when I launched this program, I went to my chair and I said, I want to recruit students that have the lowest, that have failed developmental mathematics many times, that maybe need developmental math and developmental reading and developmental writing, that that have been in and out, that maybe are non-traditional students. And my chair said, I've never heard of a program that's looking for the lower end of the spectrum. I always see programs looking for give scholarships to students that are doing well or on the dean's list. And I said, well, let's give it a try. And one of the most phenomenal outcomes that I didn't put on this PowerPoint, but that I do want to share with you, is that we've had a tremendous amount of people, and I say tremendous, and I would be happy, I think tremendous would fit even just one person, but we have about 15% of our population that have changed their major or their minor to math or a math-based major. And these are individuals who started off hating math, not doing well, repeated failures, etc. So on this slide, you can see the what kind of passing rates we're seeing with college algebra. We've had 90% with a D or better, 84% with a C or better, which is not shabby. We've had a 21-point jump in the average TSI or THEA score. This is likened to AccuPlace or any other placement test. And we also see persistent outcome, and we have many of our students who continue on, whereas before maybe were in jeopardy of not graduating from college. So a few of my friends at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board who helped provide us with some of the seed money recognized the great success of the program and had suggested that we be the model program for Complete College America and dissemination across the state. So they did push that proposal forward, and it was funded. I think that happened in 2011. And we were able to take the model and disseminate it across Texas and at various colleges, community colleges, and universities. And so this slide, number 26, shows you some of the institutions that where we have the focus program. And we also have other, through Complete College America and those types of professional developments, we were able to target other states that have adopted similar models or have used the model to begin providing a similar type of program. And
great, thanks.
My contact information, but I think you have that anyway.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Mireles.
Sure.
All right, we will move into the guided discussion now. So I'm actually going to lead off with a question for everyone, but then I see lots of great questions popping up for individual presenters, so I'll go into those after this first question. So I'm just wondering, can each of you share, each of you have done a major project that required a lot of buy-in from stakeholders and different departments in the college, from whether that's student support departments or faculty departments. What was the process or the overall strategy your institution or you used to get both administrators and faculty really invested in the project and working together? And we'll start with Chris. Are you okay with being the first to start, Chris?
Sure.
Great, thank you.
Well, because the president had that initiative, we didn't really have to struggle with the administrative piece, which is unusual in some cases, but he was such a strong advocate for that it helped with the budget and financing, even just to go to other institutions to review what they were doing. Mm-hmm. But as far as faculty and student support, when we created the College Prep Committee, we included key faculty from both the transfer classes and the developmental classes. We also included student support. We had someone from the Student Services area and our Learning Enhancement Center, which is our tutoring center. And our the individual who works with students with disabilities is also on that committee. So because we created that strong cohort group, I believe that that helped the conversations, and everyone had a personal investment from where they were coming from. So that just kind of spread then to other discussions and other committees, and so it was more of kind of a slow domino effect. And the more people talked about it, the more excited and interested they were in helping students be more successful. So starting with those key individuals who are interested to begin with, and then letting that kind of ripple out was really the strategy that we used that turned out to be very effective.
And did you request those individuals to be taking those to their department and division meetings? Was that part of the process?
Yes, and the division chairs were also part of that, so they naturally talked about it in division meetings, and so those divisions heard about it, and then we also talked about it whenever we had, we call it Student Learning Day. It's our faculty in service at the beginning of the academic year, and I always present the college prep information to them and the demographics of our student population so that they will realize who is sitting in their classrooms. And once that kind of began, I've been doing it for about 5 years now, that also really raised awareness of the needs these students have and what we were doing as an institution to help support them.
Great. Do either of you want to chip in on this question and share what you've done on your campus or system?
Sure. This is Lenore. For us, what we did was we launched full scale into trying to redesign what we do for our students in earnest in 2011. And what we did was we took about 6 to 7 months to allow the institution as a whole to look at our data and to come up with collective solutions. We created these very intricate planning and implementation teams that included faculty, staff, and administrators from across departments and campuses to, number one, look at what were the barriers to student success, and number two, to come up with solutions. We gave them carte blanche. We said, if you could plan the ideal way to fix the issue with our students, how would you do that? And then once they had that ideal system, we had them map out what our current systems were and then identify ways in which we could begin to bridge the gap between the current and the ideal. And that led us to the development of a very structured implementation plan where we focused on the so-called low-hanging fruit first, creating some baseline processes and procedures that then we can build on. But having the groups of faculties, administrators, and staff be the ones to do the planning and to be the voices out there for a call to arms and to change was really the key to the success of our efforts. And then coupled with that, which is one of the questions that just popped up recently on the chat, is professional development. We've dedicated 2 complete days, one in the fall and one in the spring, for faculty training. The way that we've structured that day is not talking heads, but actual workshops. It's almost like a full-blown conference where you get to choose which workshop you want to attend that are hands-on training. We've conducted training with over 250 advisors, 300 faculty, and numerous administrators, totaling more than 1,500 hours of training in the past 2 years.
Wow. And how did you engage, and maybe you said this and I just missed it, but how did you engage the division chairs? Did they have in terms of faculty, did they have a specific role in this? When did you bring them in?
So our department chairs are not faculty. They're actually administrators. We have a little bit of a different structure from other areas. We do have a very large faculty that is unionized, and we made sure that the faculty were key leaders in the process. Many of the members of our implementation council, our steering committees, our teams are actually leaders in the faculty union, and they themselves have become a voice for change. I think once you have everyone on the same page that there is an issue and that issue is that our students are not successful, the faculty quickly come on board, especially if they are allowed to be part of the solution and their voice is one of the critical ones in developing all the plans. And that's really what we've put into motion. It's very easy for an administrator to come out and say, here's what we need to do, and sort of force everyone to follow a particular pathway. And it takes a little more time when you let the faculty grapple with it, but at the end of the day, you save a lot of grief by having them involved on the ground floor.
Dr. Mireles, I'm wondering for your statewide work, how you got the coordinating board and the other colleges interested. And then I know we have a lot of questions people have, so we'll move on to those quickly.
Sure, no problem. I think the primary interest is that everybody is looking for something that works, and they're and have good intentions to provide quality opportunities for students. So that really is something that I have found the common denominator among all the different institutions that we worked with. From the other thing that is maybe more poignant is the fact that there was money involved, and so the institutions actually had an opportunity to have funding to support these types of initiatives, and that always speaks volumes. And I will say, though, that in terms of the professional development question, I think that's extremely critical, that it is very difficult to infuse some of these instructional methods in individuals that have already had a successful teaching career and are asked to do things a little bit differently or to consider doing things a little differently. So that type of change is at times difficult. And also, but what we have found has been helpful is that we are more collegial. They recognize that we always lend a critical eye to what we're doing, and that the process is evolving, and as is the product, and that they're a part of that.
Great. There's one technical question. Someone asked if Rend Lake or Miami-Dade are unionized, and I believe both of them are. Is that correct, the faculty?
Yes, Rend Lake is.
Yes, Miami-Dade as well.
Great. So one of the questions that had come up was whether or not all of these programs work only with students who have a high school diploma, or do you also incorporate students who need GEDs through accelerating opportunities or any of your other adult ed related programs?
Some of these community colleges, this is Selina, some of these community colleges that were mentioned, listed in the Complete College America slide, are community colleges that provide adult basic education. South Texas College, for example, is one of them, and they have had similar success doing programs like this. And one thing that I failed to mention was one of the legs of the stools is just listed as developmental math. It's not listed as a specific type of developmental math. For example, at Texas State, we have 2 levels, and some institutions have 3 or 4. And we have found the program works best when you just look at developmental math in a just-in-time way to be prepared to do well in college algebra. So we have had students who would normally have been placed in lower levels or not even at level and have still been successful.
Great. I'm getting a lot of questions for Dr. Rodicio. One of them is, at Miami-Dade, what was the format of the one-week prep and when was it offered to students? And this particular person is concerned that their students wait until the last minute to apply or register, so even though they offer prep workshops, students don't always take them as there isn't time before school starts. Has that been an issue at Miami-Dade also?
It has not, because as I said before, one of the things we did is once we identified the barriers, we developed an implementation plan and tried to figure out what processes we needed to put in place in what order. And so we did 2 critical things that allowed us to do the boot camps. One was we created a no late registration policy. If you're not enrolled by 11:59 p.m. the day before a course starts, you have to wait until the next mini-term opens up to register. We also instituted for all first-time in college students a mandatory orientation. And the way we make it mandatory is that registration for the fall actually occurs, or for whatever term you're entering, actually occurs during this orientation. So if you don't attend, you don't get registered for courses. So because we've put those 2 pieces in place, the students are coming earlier. When we first suggested this, people looked at us like if we had suddenly grown an extra head and said that we'd never be able to do it, that our enrollments would drop tremendously. But comparing this year to last year, so last year was the first year that we introduced the change. Our enrollment change was nearly flat. And this year, the group of students that were required to come through orientation, the number of students in that cohort increased by 23%. So even though we were requiring them to jump through more hurdles, we actually had a jump in enrollment there. Our returning students is where we lost enrollment this year, but the new students actually grew in number. Relating to the structure of the boot camps themselves for test prep, they are a 1-week intensive camp. For reading and writing, we use My Reading Lab and My Writing Lab as the technological tool that the faculty use. For mathematics, the faculty chose to use the ALEX software from McGraw-Hill. In both cases, students do a diagnostic on the first day of class to identify the skill gaps that they have. The faculty then individualize which gaps the students are going to work with during this week. They meet for 4 hours each day during the week and test on the last day. What we found was that about half of the students went up one placement level, and then half of those completely tested out of developmental education. But what was most impressive was that they performed as well, if not outperformed, students who had directly placed into those courses without the boot camps.
Great. And someone asked if you'd be interested or willing to share the curricula for some of those for those boot camps.
Sure, I can share the training that we did for the faculty, and then I have to check with the publishers how shareable the actual course is. It's been a while since I've dealt with my labs from Pearson and Alex directly, but yes, we'd be willing to share the structure, the curriculum, and so on.
Thanks. I have a few questions for Ren Lake. So does the cohort data that you all have for your developmental students how does it compare to the rest of the student population? Are there similar trends in the regular student population in terms of graduation?
Our completion rate for our general population is 68%, whereas for our college prep students or students who place into developmental classes is only around 30%. So it's significantly different.
And did you see, when you saw the kind of ups and downs over the years, did you see similar things with the students who were not college prep?
I don't think it was as drastically different at one time as it is now, and we just continue to see a changing demographic in our students, as I'm sure everyone does, in their motivation and their work ethic in the classroom and some of those things. And so we tend to believe that that makes it more pronounced with those that are underprepared, but we don't have data really to support that. That's more intuition.
And how many developmental courses do you guys offer? That's one question I got.
We offer one developmental English and one developmental reading course, and then we have 3 different levels for math.
Okay. So I've got a question here for Dr. Mireles, and then I do want to ask a question about dealing with opposition or differences of opinion about strategies. So someone asked, Dr. Mireles, to what do you contribute the success of these students who normally have scored very lowly?
Well, one of the things that I've been working on for about a year and a half or so is this idea of placement. And I've been working with one of my colleagues, Dr. Terry Westbrook, and a couple of the doctoral students, another colleague, Dr. Lindsay Gerber. We're actually presenting at CAS, which is a statewide conference next week. But it's the idea of placement and really adding more dimension to that. I don't necessarily believe that the students are being placed correctly based on one exam. And we've developed this idea of math readiness indicators, giving us a better idea of what these students come to the table with. It includes math anxiety rating score based off of the instrument that Swinney developed. It also includes factoring in a LASI score, the Learning and Study Strategies Inventory that was developed by Carolyn Weinstein. So if you're interested in what those 9 to 10 we're playing with indicators are, then I'm more than happy to share my website with you. But in any event, I think that the students are not being placed correctly, and so we're really not capturing what their motivation is. And the students seem to think that the focus program or programs that provide them some type of leg up, some type of boost, some type of last hope, they really are motivated and willing to try hard and willing to do the things that we ask them to do, such as go to tutoring twice a week. And it really is, I think, some of those affective things that are making a significant contribution to their success.
Excellent. So I do want to ask one last question. We have several other questions, and if people have other questions, feel free to type them in. We will also follow up with the presenters afterwards and get the answers to the remaining questions and send them to you. We also, all the presenters have been very kind and agreed that they would be willing to do follow-up, smaller follow-up calls with people if they're interested. So we would, schedule an informal, a smaller call with each of the presenters. So if you're interested in that, when we end the webinar, you'll see that on the survey, and you can select which one you're most interested in. So I just want to ask really quickly, did any of you run into really big challenges where there were just differences between faculty or differences between administrators and faculty that seemed intractable? And how did you kind of move through that and get everybody working in the same direction? I know it's a very sensitive question.
This is Lenore. Well, I'll relate that early on in the process when we were getting started to implement some of these things, I actually walked into a faculty discipline meeting where they were having a bit of a heated discussion, and when someone saw me walk in, they actually asked me to leave. An administrator making faculty decisions and actually asked me to leave the meeting. So that just, that's one of the challenges that we have as we, as we go through this change. Folks are afraid of change, and especially if it's going to impact the way that they're used to doing their job. And what needs to be established is an open forum for dialogue and conversation so that you can get everyone on the same page that, yes, change needs to happen, and then work with them so that the change can be implemented in such a way where you're pushing to get changes done early on, but you're not pushing so hard that it causes everyone to shut down. And it's a very delicate balance, and I wish I had a recipe for it, but it really is more art than science, and it's just trying to have as many feelers out there, working very closely with faculty leadership, understanding who's on board and who are the ones that are going to take a little more coaxing, and using the faculty themselves as their own spokespersons.
Great. Well, we still have a lot of great questions, but we've run out of time. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us. We will send answers to the remaining questions, as well as a recording of this webinar, which I know I will be listening to, and that will also be made available on YouTube as well. Contact information for each of the presenters is available here. I wanted to mention that we recently released a policy brief called Fourth Year Sophomores, specific to what's going on in Illinois and how we'd like, things that colleges are doing now to help more remedial students succeed. And we will be following up with all of you with some answers to your questions. A short survey is about to pop up. Please take a minute or two just to let us know what you thought about the webinar and to vote on future webinar topics or sign up for a follow-up call with one of these presenters. Thank you so much to everyone, and happy Friday.